Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I really appreciate your time today and the organizers' time and invitation to join this panel. Um, my name is Melissa Scanlan. I'm a professor at the School of Freshwater Sciences at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. I'm also the director of the Center for Water Policy there and affiliated faculty at the UW Law School. Today, we'll be talking a bit about the nation's water infrastructure. As this is a huge topic, we'll be focusing on the programs that aim to support our nation's wastewater and stormwater infrastructure under the Clean Water Act and how they can be used to support disadvantaged communities. So I'll be talking to you about water infrastructure, disproportionate burdens on certain communities, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and how that ties into the Clean Water Act and its legacy. There are three broad areas to address when you're thinking about water infrastructure: drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. Today we're going to be focusing on the Clean Water Act, so I'll be talking about wastewater and stormwater. So just as a background, the purpose of wastewater infrastructure is to collect, transport, and treat the wastewater that our communities generate. And this includes the collection pipes, the systems that move between the various points, and the treatment plants. This, of course, supports sanitation and manages potential contamination generated by the wastewater. And these programs arise under the Clean Water Act. Title VI deals with the Revolving Fund program, which I'm going to discuss in greater detail today. When we talk about stormwater, municipal stormwater infrastructure manages the runoff produced by storms and flooding events. And as water runs across yards and streets, it picks up debris and oil and pesticides and other pollutants in it. So examples of stormwater infrastructure include collection basins for the rain, stormwater pipes and drains, or green infrastructure. And there are sections of the Clean Water Act that deal with stormwater collection and the grant funding to pay for it. To contextualize our discussion of present infrastructure legislation, we should review how municipal wastewater flowing through sewage facilities or publicly owned treatment works, POTWs, have been regulated under the Clean Water Act. Title II of the Clean Water Act directed the EPA to establish grant programs to fund anywhere from 55 to 85% of the construction costs of POTWs. And these programs were funded to account for about 20 years of projected growth. The grants were opposed by the Nixon administration, who attempted to veto and subsequently delayed appropriating the funds for these programs. And this delay set construction back by years, impacting the success of the early days of the Clean Water Act. Now, Title III of the Clean Water Act sets effluent standards. And originally, the deadline for these standards was in 1977. For discharges from POTWs, there were technology-based secondary treatment, best practical technology standards set. And eventually, only 58% of the POTWs were in compliance by the 1977 deadline, in part because of the delays in the grant program. By 1990, Congress had phased out these infrastructure grants and replaced them with the state revolving funds program in Title VI that still exists today. Unfortunately, our nation's water infrastructure does not operate as envisioned in all communities equally across this country. And some communities are more disadvantaged than others when it comes to the ability to have water infrastructure, clean the municipal water, that sewage water that's being created, and releasing that into the waters of the United States. Failing water infrastructure in already disadvantaged communities can compound the impact to health outcomes, access to basic needs, and financial resources. And there are examples nationwide of communities struggling with this challenge. But today I want to focus on one to illustrate the issue. In Lowndes County, Alabama, this is a predominantly Black population, and approximately 25% of the community are living below the poverty line, with a median household income of $29,714. Many of the residents in this county live without even having septic systems attached to their homes. So 80% of residents lack personal septic systems on their homes, and they have these makeshift straight pipe systems that are dumping raw sewage into ditches. The sewage can back up during rainfalls and overflow back into the homes and public spaces when it rains. The household systems are really too expensive for each of these individual households to put in place, because to put a private mound system in place, it would cost anywhere from $6,000 to over $10,000 per household. In some cases, this is greater than the value of the existing homes. And in a place where median household income is just shy of $30,000, this is really out of reach for many residents' budgets to be able to provide clean water. I'm going to conclude talking about the Alabama example by just noting that they are currently participating in a pilot program with the USDA, and it's just really hard to put a POTW where the population has such limited density, it's widely dispersed, and they have a very low tax base to pay for it. So these distributed small systems have a lot of challenges, some of which could be addressed by the new national water infrastructure funding. But before we get to that, I would like to put our nation's water infrastructure funding on the table as a whole. The EPA conducts periodic needs assessment surveys and projects 20 years of financial need to maintain our clean water and drinking water infrastructure. In 2012, the need for our stormwater and wastewater infrastructure was $271 billion. And in 2015, the need for our drinking water infrastructure was even more dramatic, $472.6 billion. So the inevitable question presents itself: how do we address the national need while ensuring support to communities like Lowndes County? We have now the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and it supports water infrastructure in many ways. This represents a massive investment to address a massive need. As you'll see, the amount that's being allocated in the new infrastructure bill is not as much as the EPA projects in terms of the need. However, it is a historic amount of funding. In total, $55 billion being allocated to water infrastructure, 23.43 billion of which is dedicated funding for the state revolving funds. So this is the single largest investment in water infrastructure in American history. In general, what the Act does is reauthorizes funding for existing programs, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, creates some new programs for stormwater and wastewater grants, and expands opportunities to provide additional support to communities struggling with affordability, so-called disadvantaged communities. So we can look at how the revolving fund has been implemented to understand more about the meaning of that term and how it might be used to address environmental justice concerns. The Clean Water State Revolving Fund is the locus of our attention under the Clean Water Act. And in this, the federal government allocates resources to states, territories, and tribes to provide financial assistance to POTWs and others who are trying to provide municipal wastewater treatment. So the states offer low-interest loans to recipients to develop wastewater and stormwater infrastructure, and these can be used to construct decentralized wastewater treatment, something that might be more appropriate in like the rural Alabama example I gave you. green infrastructure, or publicly owned treatment works that are more appropriate for municipal areas. States are given a tremendous amount of freedom to design their own financing programs. However, it's not unbridled freedom. Each state must submit an annual intended use plan to the EPA describing the structure of their programs and any criteria they use to assign priority and determine affordability. So this is the point where the EPA has a review ability over the state's use of the funds. What happens with the federal Clean Water State Revolving Fund is that they provide for low interest loans. There is a payment term of 30 years with a 1-year deferment. There are subsidies allowed under this, and as I mentioned, there is affordability criteria that the states implement. The affordability criteria for additional subsidization are up to each state to define. Common metrics include median household income, unemployment rate, or population size. And depending on the metrics used, some communities in need may really struggle to access funding due to their need not being captured in the affordability criteria. The first week of February 2022, the White House released a guidebook for the spending of this new federal infrastructure money called Building a Better America. That's the name of the guidebook. And the guidebook describes disadvantaged communities in a much more expansive way than these common affordability metrics. And it includes race. It describes the law as, quote, presenting a unique opportunity to apply for and receive significant federal funding to rectify the harms of decades of disinvestment. And it notes that the EPA administrator sent a letter to all of the states requesting they maximize the potential to remove barriers and prioritize the distribution of grant funds to disadvantaged communities when the states submit their intended use plans. So here's a snapshot of Wisconsin's 2022 affordability criteria for additional subsidization. And as you can see, they utilize a combination of population size and percent of state median household income to determine affordability. Depending on a community's classification, they could receive more attractive loan terms. Before receiving additional subsidies, however, applicants must receive financial assistance, and Wisconsin has an application process that other states maybe similarly have, through which municipalities applying for financial assistance are assigned a priority score. This is a screenshot of a small part of the help text online. And as you can see, points may be awarded to prioritize funding for things that could prevent various violations of effluent limits or provide sewerage to a previously unsewered area. Though a municipality may not qualify for additional subsidization according to the chart we saw previously, these criteria may still allow them to rank for loans through the state revolving fund program. So to tie everything together, let's recall one of the primary goals of the Clean Water Act is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters, and to get us to fishable and swimmable waters. Attaining that goal is impossible without proper wastewater and stormwater infrastructure. So projects such as the ones I've been talking about are truly critical step. We're at a point where there will be a historic increase in federal water infrastructure funding over the next 5 years. And although these funds do fall short of projected needs, they are supposed to be targeted to disadvantaged communities, and they will allow many communities to provide cleaner water. Of course, the devil's going to be in the details, and that's for all of us to be involved in seeing how states are implementing these programs and the affordability criteria as they prioritize what communities are going to receive this influx of federal water infrastructure funding. Thank you for being here today, and I'm happy to answer questions.